A, B, C, D, E, F, G,
T, A, A, or D, S, P. I hope you brought an appetite, because today we'll have a good helping of alphabet soup. The International Traffic in Arms Regulations, or ITAR, provides many different ways to export and temporarily import defense articles. The Directorate of Defense Trade Controls in the U.S. Department of State maintains the Defense Export Control and Compliance System. DEX allows companies to obtain approval for their controlled, international activities. Today, we're going to learn about the different vehicles you can use to export defense articles and defense services.
A brand new car!
Sorry, not that kind of vehicle. Even so, I want to say thank you very much for being here. If you enjoy today's video, please let me know by smashing the like button. If you're interested in learning more about the ITAR and international trade compliance in general, please subscribe and ring that notification bell. Alright, let's make some alphabet soup.
That's delicious.
The most common type of export authorization is a license. Licenses allow for the export and import of defense articles from and to the United States. They all expire 4 years after approval, though some can be renewed to effectively allow for a longer term. So what types of ITAR licenses are there? Permanent exports of controlled hardware or technical data are handled through DSP-5s. Fun fact, and one that very few people know.
Bears eat beets. Bears beets Battlestar Galactica.
Thank you, Jim, but I was going to say that DSP stands for Department of State Pro Forma. There are several different flavors of permanent export license. Hardware licenses cover the export of controlled physical items from the U.S. Technical data licenses approve releases of export-controlled information, or ECI. For example, if the UK MOD sends you an RFP for delivery of an AESA radar, you'll likely need to get a tech data license in place before you respond. Marketing licenses may cover both hardware and technical data, but their primary purpose is to gain U.S. government approval for the eventual sale of an item to a particular customer. Foreign person employee licenses are used to allow for releases of technical data and access to defense articles by non-U.S. employees of a U.S. company. Offshore procurement licenses allow for exports of technical data for a non-U.S. company to produce and deliver defense articles back to the U.S. One major limitation of this type of license is that the approved company can only work with other subcontractors in their own country. If they need to use a supplier in a third country, then a different type of authorization, called an agreement, would be required. I should also mention, DDTC provides the DSP-6 to allow for minor modifications to a 5. The use of 6s is fairly limited, however, and only really covers things like correcting typos, changing freight forwarders, and making address changes for a U.S. party. A DSP-73 is what you would use for temporary exports of hardware. There's no such thing as a temporary license for tech data. Once you've said something, there's no way to make the other person forget. No matter how much you might wish there was.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you will, look right here.
In ITAR terms, temporary means less than 4 years. If your hardware is going to stay out of the country longer than that, your best bet is to handle it through a permanent license. The most common use case for a 73 involves repair or replacement of hardware produced outside of the U.S. These licenses can also be used for temporary transfers of test equipment and many other situations. DSP-74s allow for minor amendments to a DSP-73, similar to how a 6 can be used to amend a 5. Now, let's take a look at imports. DSP-61s provide for the temporary import of hardware into the U.S. These are most often used when a non-U.S. customer sends a defense article back to the OEM for calibration, testing, repair, replacement, or modification. You may remember from other videos that permanent imports aren't regulated by the ITAR. Instead, the Department of Justice manages them through the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. I wonder what happened to the E. Just like 6s and 74s, a DSP-62 can modify a DSP-61. The last type of license is the DSP-85. These offer a wide degree of flexibility in that they can be structured to cover both exports and temporary imports of hardware and/or technical data. You're probably thinking to yourself, David, this sounds too good to be true. What's the catch? Well, 85s can only be used for US classified hardware and information.
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
So while this may have sounded like an easy button, it's really anything but. There also isn't an 86. If you need to make a change to an 85, you have to apply for an entirely new license. Now that we've covered the different types of licenses, let's shift our focus to the other main category, agreements. Whereas the maximum duration of a license is 4 years, the expiry date of an agreement is up to 10. You may have also noticed that we've only talked about hardware and technical data up to this point. So what about defense services? Technical assistance agreements are primarily used to cover U.S. parties providing defense services outside of the U.S. This can take a variety of forms, such as co-development of a defense article by a U.S. and a non-U.S. company, integrating a U.S. origin item into a non-U.S. platform, or providing sustainment services such as repair or modification for a customer's fleet. While these are only 3 examples, TAAs can cover just about any scenario you can imagine. David, wait. I thought you said earlier that tech data licenses could cover releases out of the US. Why do I need a TAA when I could just use a 5? Great question. While technical data licenses do allow for the transfer of ECI, you'll need a TAA to have a good back-and-forth technical dialogue. Remember, the definition of defense service includes the transfer of technical data. So while you can transfer technical data under a DSP-5, even on an oral and visual basis, real constructive Q&A can only happen under an agreement. Manufacturing license agreements are similar to TAAs. The key difference is that MLAs are required to provide manufacturing know-how or grant manufacturing rights to a non-US party. Let's look at a couple of situations where you might need an MLA. The ITAR defines manufacturing know-how as detailed processes and techniques needed to translate a design into a finished article. Let's assume that you've developed a cutting-edge widget that no one else in the world knows how to make.
I'm a man who discovered the wheel.
If you decide to stand up a second source of supply with a company in Norway, then you'd need an MLA. Manufacturing rights come into play when a US person allows another party to produce and distribute an item for which they own the intellectual property. Continuing with the same example, if you let the Norwegian company sell your widget directly to customers, with or without a royalty, then you've granted manufacturing rights. Although this example doesn't highlight it, MLAs are required whenever manufacturing rights are granted, even if there's no transfer of know-how. MLAs also have a requirement for an annual sales report. Once a year, the parties must notify DDTC of all sales or other transfers relative to the agreement. Now let's completely break the mold. Unlike TAAs and MLAs, warehousing and distribution agreements don't allow for the transfer of either technical data or defense services. WDAs are used to authorize the creation of storage or distribution hubs for defense articles outside of the US. These also have an annual reporting requirement similar to MLAs. I bet you thought we were all done talking about licenses. While agreements mainly focus on defense services, they can also provide for the transfer of related defense articles. Licenses obtained in furtherance of an agreement are called IFOs. 5s, 61s, 73s, and even 85s can all be set up this way. Going back to our example, to send parts and components to the team in Norway, you would need to get an IFO 5 in place before shipping the hardware. Finally, you're probably wondering how long it takes DDTC to approve a license or agreement. While timelines vary based on the scope of the application, you can generally expect an answer on a license within 4 to 8 weeks. Agreements take much more time, on the order of 3 to 6 months. But what if I told you there were ways to make an ITAR export without having to wait at all? Keep an eye out for an upcoming video about exemptions. I hope you enjoyed today's meal of alphabet soup. 25 unique acronyms in under 10 minutes isn't too shabby. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you have any questions or ideas for future videos, remember, go ask David in the comments section below. This is David saying, ta-ta for now.